This Choircast podcast is brought to you by Heretic 2 by Matthew J. DiStefano. Ready to challenge everything you thought you knew about faith? In Heretic 2, I dive into LGBTQ affirmation, rejecting divine violence, and embracing universalism in a bold post-Christian perspective. If you're done with outdated dogma and want a justice-oriented, inclusive view of spirituality, then this book is for you. Get Heretic 2 wherever books are sold and start rethinking faith today. This Choircast podcast is brought to you by High Minds. Join host Andy Colenso and Matthew J. DiStefano as they tackle culture, justice, spirituality, and all the big questions shaping our world. High Minds isn't about talking points or hot takes. It's about deep, insightful conversation that inspires and challenges. Tune in to explore new angles, question the status quo, and elevate your thinking. Listen to High Minds wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Radical Love Life, an ongoing series of conversations with thought leaders exploring faith outside the boxes. Hosted by Mark Dilcomb and Kelly Wilson.
Hey, Mark.
Hello, Kelly.
How are you?
I am freaking awesome.
I love that. I love that you maintain your freaking awesomeness.
I do. I am, as I was sharing with a group of folks last night, I have just leaned into letting the flow go, right? You know, it's not about perfection or anything else. It's just letting everything unfold as it is and just kind of taking a seat to it all, knowing that I'm not in control. I mean, I can move here and there and make decisions based on what's presented, but you know, there's a higher power in action here. So just let it happen.
Wow. That's, I admire the serenity. I've been calibrating myself every day as to the degree of serenity and or panic I should be having at the time. Like, is today one of those days that I accept what I cannot change, or one of those days that I'm courageous enough to change what I can't? You know, so, like, am I going to the protest today, or am I going to the spa for self-care?
That is very true. And you're right. So there will be those moments that I can go into those spaces. And did you go protest yesterday?
I did not. I did not.
All right. But yeah, I know you and your kidlet are all about getting into those protests. And I appreciate it. But you're right. You know, but overall, I see you as being one that lives in a good state of grace and serenity for the most part. You know?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I guess I'm fairly stable, but I try to live my prayers in action, so to speak.
Oh, I like it.
Yeah. I don't just, I have a hard time being just like God's in control, because sometimes I got to believe that God's not entirely in control of that. So we got.
Well, no, let's hear. So now I know we need to give it to our guest. I am not about preordainment or predestination or any of that other, whatever phrase you want to use. I'm very much in the moment and I lean towards the more of the Thomas Ord school of thought of open and relational theology. So at that level, you know, we co-create as we go, but I'm just, you know, I'm in a space where, yeah, it's good. Just let it go.
Yeah. I kind of hear that, but I'm a big believer in miracles. So, but we can get to that.
Yeah,
I
we'll
do want to
talk
get to
about
our
that.
guest.
Let's get to
I
our
believe
guest.
he may have some things to say.
You know, coincidentally,
Yes.
he may just have a couple of things to talk about. So I guess we should introduce him.
So welcome today to Dr. Mark Karris, who is a specialist he's a therapy and counseling and specializes in religious trauma, as well as other. He's also an expert in marital and couples therapy. So maybe, you know, if we run into any problems, we can.
What? I thought we were a perfect couple. We didn't have any problems. Do we have problems?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Do we have to keep this offline?
No.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, that's for another day. But Mark is also the author of his latest book is called Beyond Fairy Tale.
Oh.
And I'm looking for the subtitle here. It's about a couple's guide to finding clarity, doing the work, and building a lasting relationship.
Wow.
And his other books are Divine Echoes, Reconciling Prayer with the Uncontrolling Love of God. So trying to figure out, like, if God's totally in control, or petitionary prayer. The Diabolical Trinity, which I loved, which is about
that's a great title.
like hell and punishing God and all the baggage that comes with that. And then also Religious Refugees, which talks about just the deconstruction process and reconstruction. And anyway, I love reading Dr. Mark's work and really glad to have you here today.
Yeah.
How are you?
Great to be here, guys. Ready to rock.
All right.
I know. And we have a lot to cover in a very short time because this is a conversation we could go for hours. So let's get into it.
All right. So I guess to start off with, and I'm sure I left a lot of things out of your bio. You accomplished quite a bit, and I'm jealous of how prolific you are as a writer. But I guess overall, what are some of the larger themes that run through your work? That might be a place to start the conversation.
That's a really good question.
Yeah, I know that they're kind of deconstructing and looking at things differently.
Yeah. I think that would be my heart. I'm always looking at things from a different perspective. One can call it a deconstructive perspective in finding the fissures and the holes, but not merely to deconstruct, to reconstruct something what I perceive as more beautiful. Knowing that I'm a situated human being and knowing that whatever I say and write will be deconstructed, hopefully at some point. And then someone else will take the mantle of showing how my work is, against God's heart and against societal norms. And I needed to repent. And then they will write a new book. It's just going around and around. The cycle
like that
of
pendulum
life
swings back and forth from...
but it's really a heart to help people, especially with my background coming from a lot of pain, my own trauma, family trauma, societal, religious, and just a real heart to help people. So it's almost like to whom is forgiven much, loves much. And I just have a heart to want to love and spread that love through thought, and through my therapy practice or workshops or teaching or whatever I could do. Yeah, that's kind of a theme.
One of the interesting things that I found in the work of yours that I've read is that, there seems to be kind of a pattern of breaking through popular mythologies to get to the heart of the story, but you don't just do it intellectually, because just going back and saying, well, like with Christianity, just going back and saying, well, the Bible was constructed like this, and it's, in the original Greek, it meant that, doesn't get into the heart and the nervous system the way that practice does. So I've noticed that in your books, you tend to go not only to the intellectual argument, but then to say, now let's talk about some practices that can reconnect you. And I think that's a really important step.
It is, because I've come to find that information does not necessitate transformation. And
so true. And sometimes it's the opposite.
Yeah. And, and obviously it could be helpful. I mean, I write books and sometimes people can have like, oh gosh, revelations. But for me, it's about experiencing. It's about presence. It's about transformation, but not in a snake oil salesperson sense of, you'll be healed forever and, never have anxiety or depression or hard days or wacky thoughts. But more integration, being who we are without the judgment. And unfortunately, religion and my tribe, Christianity, has not been kind in that way. And it's really been like a metaphorical syringe pumping people full of shame and guilt, and thus creating a feedback loop where, what are they going to do with that? Well, they're going to take it back to God. Well, where is God? God's in our church. And so let me give you the medications of sermons and, worship songs. And so you keep coming back, but we keep telling you that you're a sinner and needs the grace of God. And so it just creates this feedback loop of trauma.
Agreed.
Yeah. A lack of real life, the giving sustenance, in my opinion.
Yeah. So, and you mentioned something I want to pick up real quick. You speak from experience. You've had religious trauma as your own personal experience?
Yeah, I'm actually an ordained pastor. So I worked in a church, many different ones, for about 15 years. Pentecostal Christian Missionary Alliance, Korean church for 4 years. I was actually ordained as a Southern Baptist, believe it or not, although they would burn me at the stake at this point. And then I graduated from Drew University, so that's a Methodist school. So a lot of different experiences, of different denominations.
Catherine Heller and others that are roaming around the halls and the lecture halls of Drew there.
Yeah, Catherine Keller. Yeah.
Thank you. I said Keller.
Oh, in other words, yeah. So I think it was the Pentecostal. That was sort of my first immersion into Christianity. It was actually called Oneness Pentecostal,
Okay.
Pentecostalism, apostolic
Mhm.
faith. So you were only saved if you were baptized in the name of Jesus. You were only saved if you spoke in tongues. Men couldn't have facial hair. Women couldn't even trim their hair. They would appeal to the book of Corinthians talking about, women cutting their hair and, something about angels and if
Yeah, you
men
got to
cut
cover
their
your
hair.
head
Yeah.
because of the angels. Yeah.
Yeah. So pretty wild stuff.
Tempting them or something. Yeah, there's some, yeah, it's a weird.
Kelly,
yeah.
looking at me, I'm sure, I don't know if you can see it so much, Dr. Mark.
Yeah.
I don't know a lot about Pentecostalism. So anytime I
Yeah.
hear things like that, I'm like, oh, they say that too. Huh? Okay. All right.
Yeah. So that was the religious milieu in which I was sort of born again, so to speak, from my other life, which is another story. But yeah, so that experience of just hell and demons and oh my gosh, 3 to 4 times a week going to church, and every time was an altar call. God, please save me. I'm a massive sinner in need of your grace, just reinforcing how a terrible worm that I am.
So that sound of disgust, like I was clearing my throat, was because of I'm going to just be very bold and use what a friend is also on the board of my foundation will call the piece of shit doctrine and theology. And I cringe when I hear about it and hear you're saying this, like, this is like, why does it, it just drives me crazy. But yes, continue with your story. So, yeah.
It should evoke, a lot of us have experienced these kind of images and stories. And so it deeply affected me. I got to the point where I couldn't even drink soda because I thought I was defiling the temple of the Holy Spirit, extremely anxious, panic attacks. It just really affected my sense of identity. Confused myself with shame. My inner critic was, out of control. So yeah, it's a lot of religious trauma in that way for sure. So
Wow.
that's a little bit of my experience. But if you want to go to sort of the sentiments of that church, it reminds me of Jonathan Edwards, the great preacher, who said, the God that upholds you over the pit of hell, much as one who holds a spider or some other loathsome insect over the fire, abhors you and is dreadfully provoked. His wrath toward you burns like fire. He looks upon you as worthy of nothing else but to cast into the fire. His pure eyes tend to bear to have you in his sight. You are 10,000 times so abominable in his eyes as the most hateful venomous serpent is in ours. That sentiment, while it seems dramatic and crazy, that was the context. I mean, that flavor of Christianity and that view of God. And we know by now that can incur religious trauma for many folks.
Wow. Okay. So I want to confirm something there. You're saying that I was taking that. This is the first time I've heard that passage, so I'm not familiar with this.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So is he being serious when what this is written? This is not hyperbole.
Yeah, this sermon, it's sinners in the hand of an angry God. Isn't that what it's?
Right. I think so. Yeah. Jonathan Edwards, a famous preacher and revivalist.
But I don't know him.
Yeah. And it's confusing, right? Because they can say, horrific, vile things like that. And then in the next breath, maybe talk about the love of Jesus and how God wants to save us. But it does remind me of, I worked with domestic abuse victim advocates for a few years.
Sure.
In that sense of, if you don't do what I tell you, you're going to get punished and I'm going to hurt you. But I love you. And if you just do what I say, we could live life and be happy together because I really care about you. But if you don't, then it has this sort of like wild roller coaster emotionally, like, what? So that love, you don't love me. You think I'm vile, but you care about, it's just very confusing and crazy making.
It
Right,
is. It
right.
is. As Bell Hooks would very clearly say, that ain't love. So, yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I don't know if you experienced this, but I've often heard that it's a kind of a dynamic tension between God's love, but then God's justice. and that God's
Yeah.
justice needs to be served. And the question for me has always been, well, why does justice win out? If God wants to give us, then like, is justice some like a rock too heavy for God to lift? I mean, why?
Yep. Right.
Well, yeah.
There is.
It's not only that though, but it's like, why is justice equated with violent physical punishment of some kind?
There's that as well. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, there's no
Right. That because if we talk to our children and we like, hey, we want to raise them as just human beings, like we would have to say, I don't want you to be just like God, like, so where did we equate justice with this form of punishment that's punitive and not restorative? That's the other question too.
Right. Yeah. And I've been reading a little bit about that lately, about this kind of the shift, because I was wondering about, certainly between like the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, that there was some kind of shift in the way that at least certain rabbis and teachers looked at the afterlife, that it was sort of like, it didn't seem fair that everybody went to the same grave, whether they were good or bad. And they started to notice like, good people have bad things happen to them, and bad people sometimes have good things happen to them. Maybe they get their rewards in the afterlife, and started like cooking up these idea of like, there's a good place and there's a bad place. And it's almost like their desire for some kind of justice pushed the theology.
Yeah. And clearly there's an evolution of consciousness around the afterlife. But if you even think about like Adam and Eve, the first punishment that was given by God, and I'm assuming that's kind of what this is all about, quote, the fall of humankind and the punishment that was given. But there's no hell in that context. He said, yeah, the day you eat of it, you shall surely die. But he didn't say the day you eat of it, you shall spend eternity in hell, being tormented forever and ever. So even in the original context where the curse punishment was given out, there's no sense of that kind of hell. And so then the question is like, well, where did that come from? And clearly you can see over time an evolution of understanding of what happens to human beings after we die.
So I admire you so much for the work that you're doing. Religious trauma is something that's very near and dear to me, and why I created the foundation, because my own personal experience as a kid and how that impacted me. And thankfully I got to the other side of that with a lot of work, and there was some therapy in there too. But the fact that you specialize in this, and I've seen others that also practice in this, there's such an overwhelming need for this. How do people get to you? I'm very curious. I mean, maybe it's you putting yourself out in the world as somebody that specializes in working with religious trauma, but I got a feeling like there's a lot of work. That's not a one session kind of gig.
Oh gosh, hell no. Yeah, it's, well, first, it is something that evolved over time, religious trauma and the research around it. And there's research being done right now on the nuances of it. People are trying to get it into the sort of the psychology Bible, the DSM 5, maybe the
Is it not in the DSM 5?
No, it's not. And so
maybe if got in there by now. Hello.
Maybe if there's a 6, they'll, we're trying to advocate for it and trying to get into awareness. But there certainly is an explosion of, life coaches and other coaches and therapists and workshops and groups and Facebook groups.
Yeah.
It's become a little bit of a fad for me. So I'm not as online as much as it's just a little too strange for me in that, but
yeah, thank you for calling that out too, because you're right. There is definitely a lot of attention being paid to that. There's books out there. I'm not going to name names because, they could very well be doing, good work in their work, but it's like, whoa, all of a sudden there's this attention to it. And yes, and rightfully so though, because there are a lot of people that have been traumatized or have some kind of, they have some negative associations. But that's why I ask you the question, because again, this is a complex, very complex. So you're getting into theologies and the psychological elements of that. And that's kind of where my question was, and the work that you're doing with deconstruction. So if I was talking to you about, hey, Dr. Mark, I think I experienced religious trauma. How does that conversation even begin?
Yeah. Well, I want to take religious trauma very seriously, obviously.
Yep.
But it's good to, differentiate between some terms. I mean, trauma is like a violent sucker punch to our minds and bodies that leaves us reeling and wondering what the heck just happened. Sometimes it's subtle and sometimes we don't experience it till later on. But generally, religious trauma refers to the enduring harmful effects caused by repeated encounters with suffocating religious beliefs, oppressive and painful behaviors from religious people, constricting rules, and confining religious structures. So the key, though, is that it often has negative effects on one's nervous system, emotional landscape, view of self, and view of others and relationships. There is something called adverse religious experiences, but that does not necessitate one have religious trauma. So some people can have really shitty, religious experiences, but, so we need to be mindful, like, well, I watched a movie. Oh gosh, I'm so traumatized. I had terrible food. God, it fucking traumatized me last night for eating that food. So we kind of use it in a way that it can lose some of its real meaning, which is true for a lot of psychology terms. There's a new book coming out, They're Not Gaslighting You, I think it's called. And so these terms of you're a narcissist or you're gaslighting or you're codependent or, using these psychology terms, which is not necessarily true to its original intent and meaning. But all that to say, I mean, if somebody comes and says, I have religious trauma, I want to take that subjective experience seriously, regardless of the definition. But it really will have a lasting effects on one's nervous system to some degree if it's truly religious trauma.
Thank you for saying all that and mentioning the adverse religious experiences as well, because I'm familiar with that term. But yeah, you're right. We throw around a lot of words that we shouldn't. That's the human condition that we do that with all words and language. We don't use it in such precision, but.
Right, like saying somebody's obsessive compulsive because they like to keep their house clean.
Yeah, exactly.
Just right, exactly. Yeah. Oh, you mean I'm OCD because I don't like a filthy bathroom? I don't know. Okay, I guess that's OCD.
Or schizophrenic if you have two personalities, which is not even the use of it's not even schizophrenia. That's called dissociative identity disorder. And, that's another, but you're right. Yeah.
Thank you for commenting on all that. Yeah.
Well, one thing that I just want to put out there particularly for anyone who's listening is there are people who've had religious, negative religious experiences or religious trauma. And because of that, they've written off religion. They're like, I'm not having that anymore. But I've noticed that in your work, you sort of, in addition to identifying the ways that religion can be traumatic, it looks like you've also found your way back. Like there are also positive things about religion or around Christianity. And I wanted to ask you about that. Like, if somebody's been traumatized by religion, is there any reason for them to stay in it?
No. I wouldn't say yes or no, because here's the interesting thing. I always want to honor where people are at. As therapists, we don't want to put our biases onto somebody else. And some people, you're right, they can quote deconstruct, and that term is kind of gone out of vogue for sure. Yeah, maybe spiritual metamorphosis, maybe that's a better term. And they could experience that metamorphosis and say, yeah, it's just not for me. I'd rather be a humanist, or an atheist or a Buddhist. Some people do choose to stay within the Christian tradition. And, they could be in the Richard Rohr and Peter Enns and Thomas Ord camp and stay in the open and relational, because that feels like the healthiest and most sane version of Christianity, right? Because there's over 35,000 different Christian sects and denominations. So, yeah, I just want people to reflect and think about what feels good. And that's a whole journey in of itself. When you take off like the Matrix, and Neo had to get those tubes off and he became completely disoriented and who am I and where am I? Once people go through that disorientation process, then that's the beautiful work of, yeah, I'm no longer sucking on the teats of this religious matrix telling me who I am, what I should want, what I should wear, what I should listen to, what I should value, what I should get rid of. but this beautiful, very disorienting and often painful season of who am I? What do I want? What feels good in my nervous system? Like, oh, feelings? Can I have feelings? Yes, you can have feelings. And they're actually good and they're actually healthy. And in my tradition, they were considered demons, right? So we would pray for people and I cast you out, you spirit of fear, or you spirit of anger, or you spirit of anxiety, or you spirit of lust. And so they would sort of project these unfortunately emotional, very healthy, normal human things onto metaphysical entities we couldn't see and call them demons, which is absolutely absurd to me, of course, looking in hindsight. Go, yeah.
I learned something in this. Are you saying that actually happens, that people preach? And I know I'm asking, I'm not teeing this up on purpose. That actually happens, that people will tell people to cast out emotions as demons?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Oh my God.
But the thing,
little I know about all the shitty things that happen to people in church.
And they would even do something like, cast out the spirit of homosexuality.
Totally.
I'm like, yeah, well, good luck with
Perfect. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that didn't work.
Conversion didn't work so well. Yeah. And that because we're depraved, we can't trust our feelings.
Oh my God. See, I am so ignorant to this stuff. And it makes sense because, this person that's on the board, who is the one that, talks about, piece of shit doctrine and the work that we've done together about the foundation. I'm like, yeah, I guess because again, I don't have that level of negative direct experiences. Mine came from just global and cultural issues, as a child, I actually didn't have any negative experiences. So I was oblivious to this stuff.
Yeah.
It's so profoundly messed up.
It is. It's a subculture. It's a stream within the Christian tradition. And I'm so thankful people, I have some Presbyterian friends, people in other traditions, UCC, some people didn't have this level of toxicity and ridiculousness and vile doctrines. They're like, yeah, I think I heard about hell once in a while, but most of the sermons were, and I'm like, cool, great. And then there's some of us who it was like a wild Harry Potter film. I remember my brother, he suffers from paranoid schizophrenia. And at the early stages, we didn't know what was going on. I was in that church tradition. For them, it wasn't a mental illness. It was demonic. And so they literally, I remember fasting for, days and having, what do they call it? The deliverance services. And we even went to the fact of bringing him to another church. I'll never forget it, where they had paper bags underneath each chair because they believed that even Christians has demons in them, and that part of their service, they would do this deliverance time where you would throw up and vomit the demons into these paper bags.
Get the fuck out of town. Are you serious?
Oh, totally. 100%. Yeah.
Were they sticking their fingers down their throats, or everybody slugging some Ipecac with the communion wine, or?
No,
just the emotion was enough to.
Yeah. Just the music and the energy.
That you personally experienced this, I would not believe that.
Yeah.
Wow.
But, there's all kinds of, are you kidding? There's all kinds of wild, people handling snakes right now. Reading.
I can handle a snake because that's not a good thing. The reason I just looked is because our producer just mentioned that he had the same experience. He said that in my ear. And I'm like, I had I didn't know this existed.
Yeah. I didn't even know that. I went some pretty intense.
Yeah. One of my friends told me that he said it felt like a demon clawing his face out when he vomited. It was at a retreat that we did.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah.
So it's,
this is upsetting.
If you thinking about
it should be
thing this on a personal level and in their community, it sort of helps explain some of what we see happening kind of nationally and in society, where you're like, how can you be so callous of kicking out immigrants and, restricting people? And it's, if you look at what they're kind of doing to themselves personally, it's sort of that same value system, but applied in a larger sense.
Yeah. I mean, part of it, I'm not sure the angle that you were just sharing, but it reminds me of, when we talk about religious trauma, I get people who just, they minimize it. Like they can't fathom how it would be, what, religion causing trauma, or people in conservative churches who hear that and just immediately think of people who just want to make excuses and are just, overly sensitive and really want to live a life of debauchery because they want to go away from tried and true doctrines. But when you get into the societal issues, the amount of callousness really comes from this rampant dehumanization and lack of really wanting to hear people's lived experiences and take those subjective experiences at face value. Like hearing, like when I'm working with people and my gosh, and talking about how this current political milieu is affecting them profoundly. Like they're afraid to go outside of their homes, that they are having panic attacks. Their anxiety is off the charts. And we know, even if you go to like Maslow's hierarchy, you can't like evolve to other experiences of human consciousness if you're trying to just keep safe. If you're experiencing constant threats, right?
Yeah. Can only operate existentially, like it's always in survival mode at that. And if you're paralyzed by all this.
Yeah.
So this is a very upsetting conversation only because of my own ignorance. And for our listeners, I hope they are as bizarrely as bothered by this. I think is the best way, because I had no idea. Like we've taken an entirely different level of like peeling the layers of the onion back on how perverse things happen within church. When I think about flawed theology, I didn't think about this stuff. This is the stuff that makes me, how is this legal? How is this legal that one person could do this to another person? I don't care about the First Amendment or RFRA or anything else. Now you're abusing humans.
Yeah. This is, I don't know. You're right. I mean, this is why I'm so passionate about it. And the more I speak with people and work with people, there's so many, like the onion is so deep. The kaleidoscopic nature of religious trauma, the nuances, even if you take one thread from it, the demons aspect, and personally, the fear of demons, I would go around, I remember being in school at the time, I felt like I had to plead the blood of Jesus around the door frame. I'm sorry, it's just fucked up, because the painful part of that is what it does is I spent so much energy in fear that energy could have been freed up to live a life that was true to myself and true to my values and freed up to love people. Right. So I'm having some emotion just thinking about the state that I was as a young man, just so fearful of demons, so fearful of saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing. Either demons could get me or God could punish me, not only in this life or the life to come. And it is vile, it's toxic, it's traumatic, and it shouldn't be. We should hopefully evolve out of this. And I get it from a evolutionary standpoint, and that's a whole other conversation. So I can have a compassionate lens. At the same time, I hope we can evolve out of this way of thinking and being.
Well, this has been a powerful conversation.
Yeah. And I definitely empathize with that sense of kind of lost time. I actually was talking about this with my therapist just the other day about that sense of, for me, it was always a sense of like, I've done something wrong. Like there's always a pervasive sense of having done something wrong. And I don't even know what it is. Like it's not even like a specific thing I can point to. It's just like, I know that I've done something wrong.
So dealing with abstract, you can't even put your finger on it.
And there's burden on it. And I still now, even after having done a lot of study and deconstruction and looking at more positive theologies, I still catch myself. I'm just like walking around the aisle at Home Depot and I'm like, wait a minute, why am I feeling guilty right now? Like I didn't. But for a hammer, like, you know what? And I have to consciously like step back from my thoughts a little bit and adjust and be like, you got to break out of that cycle, dude.
Yeah. I mean, do the fruit test on that. In other words, this can't be what's considered life abundant, right? Like Jesus was talking about.
Right.
It simply can't.
Good news for the poor.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, it's really.
As we only have a couple of minutes left in this awesome conversation with you. Thank you, Dr. Mark, and thank you for being so vulnerable. And
Sure.
it was not my intent, or I'll speak for Kelly on this, not our intent to expose your own vulnerability this way as a professional, but thank you for sharing and being true, vulnerable, and authentic, right? Because I hope our listeners, like, they take something from this conversation like I have, like, oh my God, I didn't know it was this bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I hope that people know that that if we want to be our authentic selves, that God can take it. That the whole idea of like sneaking around and trying to, control your thoughts and keep the demons out or whatever, that I would prefer that people just approach God and be like, here I am, this is me, flaws and all, kind of like the Psalms, and live a much more authentic.
Well, that's kind of how I roll. Maybe it's because I had a divorce and then come back on my own terms that I have that capability, but I also didn't have all this shit happen to me like this.
Yeah, I know it's taken me a long time to even begin to kind of present myself authentically because of all that stuff.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up here, Dr. Mark,
Yeah.
any parting thoughts? Like, what do you share something with us here?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's such a meaningful conversation, and I just want people to know, and listeners, obviously, they're not crazy. This stuff really has a lot of ramifications, heart, mind, soul, body, just holistically affect us as human beings. And thankfully, that's not the end of the story. And there's people like you and myself and so many others who believe in health and openness and vulnerability and healing and community and something that feels life-giving, whether it's practices, principles. And so that's the hope. And I get it. That's hard. It can feel like eating sour lemons, going to other human beings, but it's human beings who hurt us. And unfortunately, it's usually being with other human beings that can promote healing. And so, we're neurobiologically wired to connect. And so there are amazing coaches out there. There's amazing groups out there. There's directories at the Reclamation Collective. You just type that in, right? And there's whole directories of therapists that you can find in all different kinds of states. And whether clinicians or coaches, some people don't want to go to a therapist, but like, oh, well, I'll go to a coach.
Yeah.
So there are plenty of them. Yeah. So
thank you for mentioning the Reclamation Collective, right?
Yeah.
Because I've seen them out there on the internet, and it looks like they do a lot of really good work in this space.
Totally.
Yeah, and we'll put the contact information in the show notes. And and it's great to go to somebody who's specifically trained in this. You think about, some people go to a pastor, and pastors are great at doing a lot of things, but they're not trained in everything. And giving public proclamation is different than sitting down with someone and
and that's not fair to put a pastor in that situation unless they're a trained professional like Dr. Mark here. If you're trained as a therapist, okay, then maybe you can go there, but that's not the case in a lot of situations. So
So where can people find out more about you and your books? And
well, not as much of a avid social media person, but markgregorykarris.com is my website, and you can find my books and audiobooks. Well, usually wherever they're found.
Where all fine books are sold.
Where books are sold. And your latest book again is Beyond Fairy Tales, a couple's guide to finding clarity, doing the work, and building a lasting relationship.
Yes, and we'll have to have you back, Dr. Mark, because clearly Kelly and I have relationship issues that I'm not aware of, and so we'll have to talk about that, and then we'll discuss your book in that context.
Yeah. I think it's because we don't talk enough.
Right.
That's our problem.
Great,
so
guys.
much fun. You, Dr. Mark. Thank you.
Yeah, and
we got a great being with you guys.
And we definitely want to have you back because there's clearly we've only touched
only scratched the surface.
The iceberg. So talk about. Thank you.
Totally.
Keep your this is great.
You got it, guys. No doubt.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Radical Love Live, hosted by Mark Dilcom and Kelly Wilson. Recorded at the Bravery Studios in Garfield, New Jersey. All rights reserved. Find our episodes on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. And check us out at radicallovelive.com, along with our personal websites at markdilcom.com and kellywilson.com. This is Radical Love Live, where we explore faith outside the boxes.
If you've ever deconstructed your faith, you know it's not easy. But just imagine if you could have people to guide you through your process. People like Jim Palmer, Kristen Dumais, Jennifer Knapp, Brad Jerzak, Brian Zand, Paul Young, and more. Well, if you head over to www.choiracademy.com and register for Square 2 using the promo code RAD, you'll get 10% off the regular registration cost of this awesome course and community just for being a fan of our show.
Embark on a journey to the heart of an isolated and restrictive island where secrets simmer beneath the surface. In Brandon Andrus's What Can't Be Hidden, follow Thura as she uncovers the dark truths of Patrida, navigating through betrayal and redemption. This tale of courage, love, and the quest for freedom will captivate you from the very first page. Get What Can't Be Hidden available now from Choir Publishing.
This Choircast podcast is brought to you by my book, Unless a Seed Falls to the Ground, Welcoming the Death of the Whiteness Gospel. I wrote this story as a plea for white Christian America to enter into a season of hospice spirituality, to recover from the cancerous lie that we can start over, be in charge, and recover some original purity of Christianity. One friend called it a love story to the church, the United States, and the entire human family. It's available now on Amazon.
Are you ready to embrace a deeper, more intentional way of living? Introducing Deep Calls to Deep, Meditations for Your Spiritual Journey, Volume 1 by Brandon Andrus. Deep Calls to Deep offers a 1.5 years of weekly meditations to inspire spiritual growth and guide you toward a more meaningful, embodied life. Order your copy today wherever books are sold and begin your journey into greater connection and purpose. Deep Calls to Deep. Let your soul awaken.